now talk about an all mail-in elections is gaining steam. And of course, this is all after the CDC had recommended states to encourage voters to cast ballots via mail due to the pandemic. Here with a different take on all of this from Washington, D.C., senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Hans von Spakovsky. Hans, your latest op-ed points out some concerns over mail-in voting, with Michigan being the latest state to push this move. You say there's a possibility votes often get lost in the mail and are subject to theft, forgery, and alteration of ballots. Democrats are saying otherwise. Your thoughts?
Well, the Democrats are just wrong about that. The history of the use of absentee ballots shows very clearly that they are the most vulnerable to being forged, altered, and stolen. Why? Well, because they are voted outside the supervision of election officials and outside the observation of poll watchers. And also, look, there have been numerous problems with the U.S. Postal Service. The idea that this is intentional, I think, there's no evidence. But we have seen plenty of evidence of problems caused, like I said, by the Postal Service. Remember, April 7th, the primary in Wisconsin, after the election was over, they found several tubs filled with absentee ballots in a mail processing facility that had never been delivered. And that is not an isolated problem. D.C. just had the same problem, thousands of absentee ballots that were not delivered in time to voters.
Right, and centralizing this just to Michigan alone. You also touched on the lawsuit, public interest, Legal Foundation versus Winfrey in your op-ed. Right. In that suit, it notes the Legal Foundation found almost 5,000 individuals who are registered more than once and are more than 2,500 voters who are dead. That's wow. I mean, clearly there's some level of incompetence here. Why has this become such a great issue in Michigan?
Well, one of the problems we have is anytime a election official or a county wants to try to clean up their voter rolls, taking people off who have died, taking people off who have moved away, they get sued by liberal organizations like the ones that Stacey Abrams represents. So a lot of states just aren't keeping their voter lists up to date. And if you switch to a system where you mail an absentee ballot to every registered voter, you're literally going to have tens of thousands of ballots being sent out to people who no longer live at the address where they're registered. And ballots are a valuable commodity. We have to worry that those ballots will get voted anyway.
Right. Also, what states, speaking of which, are not equipped to run mail-in ballots, and why do you think that is?
Well, look, there are 5 states in the country that have switched to all-mail elections, which I think is a bad idea. The Secretary of State of Washington State, which is one of those states, said recently that it took her state 5 years to gear up to be able to go from just handling a couple of 100,000 mail-in ballots to millions of mail-in ballots. There's no way that other states, places like Georgia and elsewhere, there's no way they can switch to an all-mail election. And frankly, there's no need to do that. We can safely have in-person voting as long as the polling places put in the same kind of safety protocols we are seeing when we go to the grocery store, drugstores, or other retail establishments.
Right. And do you think there's a way we can track if the voting count to make sure that it's handled properly? I mean, is there any insurance of that? Is there some way that we can go back and audit this election if things were to go wrong?
We could try to do that, but that would be an enormous task because of how many votes have been cast. Look, keep in mind this number. The U.S. Election Assistance Commission files a report on every federal election. In the last election, they reported, the 2016 election, that is, for president, they reported that 6.5 million ballots, mail-in ballots or absentee ballots, the states don't know what happened to them. They have a category called unknown, which means that they handed the ballots over to the Postal Service to deliver to voters who had requested them, and then they never heard another word. So they don't know whether those ballots got lost in the mail, whether the voter decided not to vote. They're unaccounted for. That is a huge number, and it shows one of the problems with mail-in balloting.